Hi, folks. This is Walter and Pat Boyer from Bookends. We are very, very excited tonight to help Michael Kay launch his new book, Center Stage, a collection of interviews over the past several decades. We're really excited. The book is actually coming out tomorrow. You're going to have a preview tonight with an interview with Michael. And we're happy that Greg Arabatzis is joining us tonight to handle that interview. Greg is an expert in scaling and growing early stage product companies in the nutritional supplements industry and works with numerous professional athletes and celebrities as brand ambassadors and influencers. And Greg has worked with us for probably about 5 or 6 interviews. Just to remind people, there is a Q&A tab on the bottom right on your screen. If you would like to send in any questions, we'll try to get to as many as we can. Michael Kay, I think everybody knows who Michael Kay is, but if you don't, he was born in the Bronx, has lived the dream of being the New York Yankees announcer for the past 30 years, the first 10 on radio, and the last 20 with the Yes Network. He's also the host of one of the top-ranked radio shows in New York City, The Michael Kay Show on ESPN New York Radio, as well as the Emmy Award-winning Yes Network interview show, Center Stage. Before he entered broadcasting, Michael was a writer with the New York Post and then the Daily News. He lives in Greenwich, Connecticut with his wife, television news anchor Jody Applegate, and their 2 children. So Greg, Michael, take us away. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Walter. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. And just a quick reminder, once again, before we get started, it's really important that we support independent bookstores like Bookends. That is the largest independent bookstore in the country. We've been doing these virtual book signings now for about the last 8 or 9 months, and they've evolved to the point where we're getting hundreds of people taking part. There still are books remaining for sale, but for those people that listen to the recorded version of this interview, please do reach out to bookends.com, book-ends.com, to be able to order the book. And it is a phenomenal book. I've just finished it myself. And without further ado, let's jump into the questions. So Michael, what was your motivation and inspiration behind writing this fine book, Center Stage?
Well, it actually started, I had vocal cord surgery a couple of years ago. So I was off the air for 6 weeks. I couldn't speak, couldn't say a word. So it was the summer and I was kind of like lying around the house reading, and I read Howard Stern's book, Howard Stern Comes Again, which was a compilation of his best interviews on the radio. And it just set a light bulb up on me. I said, wow, we could do something similar with the Center Stage interviews. Now, what Howard did in his book was take little snippets out of all the interviews and do it that way. And I said, the full body of the interviews actually will read better than possibly than even a TV situation. Because in TV, the pictures and the lights flash by and somebody could say something and you could have missed it by just looking at something. But if it's in black and white and print, I think it has a little more gravitas to it. So that was the germination of it. Then we started to pare down all the interviews. I think we've done 240 Center Stage interviews, and we had to pick the 35 best just for the size of the book. And we did that, and that's how the book came about. So if you like it, you could thank Howard Stern, and if you don't like it, you could blame Howard Stern.
As a successful journalist starting out in your career, did you ever envision or visualize yourself now as a successful author, along with being a host of a successful radio program and Center Stage?
Well, I can't say anything was greatly planned out. A lot of it was just fortune, I guess. Ever since I was 9 years old, I wanted to be the Yankee announcer. That was my goal. So the fact that came about is kind of startling to me. I still can't believe it 30 years later. I mean, how many people in the world get to love their job and actually live out their dream? And everything else kind of came through that. The radio show came through that. And then Center Stage came from the, being associated with the Yes Network. And then obviously the book from Center Stage. When I was a writer, before I became a broadcaster, I thought maybe I would write a book somewhere down the line. I didn't think it would be something like this. I think there's another book in me in terms of all the things that I've lived and gone through and the people that I've met. But at this time in my life, this time in my career, I thought that this was the best vehicle for me to put in a book.
Great, great. So I've read and I've heard you talk about in many instances that in Little League, you wore the number 1 for Bobby Mercer, and having the opportunity and I guess sort of a lifelong dream being able to share the broadcast booth with Bobby. Can you illuminate a little bit about that?
He was just one of a kind. And, you know, after I got to know him for a while, I actually said to him, I said, wow, you know, 9-year-old Michael Kay really had good taste. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I idolize you and I'd never met you. And now after working with you and getting to know you and getting to know your family, I could tell that I knew what I was thinking when I was 9 years old, because he lived up to everything that you'd want your idol to live up to. And let me tell you, everybody that's out there, and thank you all for joining. You know, sometimes you meet your idols and you're gravely disappointed, really, really disappointed. Bobby Mercer did not disappoint at all. He was everything that I dreamed he would be. He left us way too soon. But, you know, there's a great story. You know, when I used to go to Yankee games as a kid, I'd go to bat day. And in those days, each of the bats had a different Yankee signature on it. And, you know, it was obviously wood burned in. And I always wanted to get a Bobby Mercer bat. And I never got a Bobby Mercer. I'd get Tom Tresh. I'd get Roy White. I'd get Jerry Kenny, Horace Clark, never Bobby Mercer, because that was the one that everybody wanted. And I once told that story on the air. Well, let's fast forward. And the Yankees had a bat day where there weren't any players' names on the bat. It was just obviously the sponsor's name. So Bobby disappeared from the booth for about 10 minutes and came back, and he had a bat and he signed it, and it said, "You finally got it, Bobby Mercer." And it's in my office where I'm sitting right now. And it's one of the coolest things I have, because it's a real personalized piece of memorabilia that means the most to me.
And I remember when Bobby passed, I had heard your voice sharing that on the air, and his unbelievable battle at the end of his life. So we all miss him. How did the concept for Center Stage come about, Michael?
Well, it's interesting that they were starting the Yes Network, and the man that they enlisted to put the Yes Network together was John Filippelli, John J. Filippelli. You hear his name at the end of all the broadcasts. He's still the boss. And, you know, he just thought that his job was to put together the Yankee broadcast. And obviously, he reached out to me. I never thought that I would leave John Sterling on the radio side, but he said if I'd like to do the television play-by-play. And I said, of course. But he also had to sit down, and he was told after he thought it was just the Yankees, they said, okay, now you also have to put together programming for the rest of the day. He said, I have to do that too? And they said, yeah, you do. So he sat down in a diner, you know, those little square napkins you get in a diner. He would just scribble out, you know, ideas about what he thought could work as what they call shoulder programming. And one of the things that he said was inside the actor studio for sports, which is the James Lipton show,
Right.
where he would interview actors in depth and long form. And then he came up with, you know, out of that came Center Stage. And as I explained in the beginning of the book, I was not his first choice, because he figured he's given this, you know, essentially a young guy all this responsibility, being the play-by-play guy. We can't put another thing on his plate. And the other couple of people that he had a wish list, Jack Ford, Leslie Visser, either they couldn't get out of contracts or whatever. And then they were all sitting around brainstorming. He said, you know, I've heard that guy, Michael Kay, that we hired. He does good interviews on the MSG network when they had the Yankees. He said, I think he'd be pretty good at this. So I think it was the third choice, but I'm glad that I got it. And I got, you know, I got to write a book out of it, but that was the start of Center Stage.
Great. Was there a particular guest that you wish the interview would have perhaps gone a little better, or maybe you regret having them as a guest?
Most of the interviews were really, really good. There's one that stands out in my mind that just wasn't good, and that was Dennis Quaid. So if we've done 240 interviews, I can honestly say that I was really satisfied with 239 of them. But Dennis Quaid was promoting the movie The Rookie, if you remember, about Jim Morris, who was 35 years old. He'd been a teacher, and he just went to a tryout camp and threw like 97 miles an hour, and they signed him, and he played Jim Morris. And he came to the studio and didn't realize that the show was an hour. He was going through some tough times in his personal life at that point. I think he and Meg Ryan had broken up, and he just didn't want to play. I mean, you've got to want to play if you're going to do an hour interview show. So the first couple of segments, he's answering every question, yes, no, which is death to an interview show. So after the second commercial, I leaned forward. I said, listen, the show's an hour. Whether you give yes or no questions or not, I've got thousands of questions. If you're going to keep answering yes or no, it's going to make you look bad, not me. And he was like kind of startled that I spoke to him that way, but that was the only way to save the show. And he picked it up a little bit after that, but then Jim Morris, the actual Jim Morris, was actually there, and he came out for the last two segments, and that made the show salvageable or watchable. But of all the interviews, that's the one that was really tough and just couldn't loosen him up. He just wasn't in the mood. There were some people that started the show somewhat reticent and didn't really open up. But then when you sit down and you realize it's a conversation and not an inquisition, that's when they start to tell you stuff.
And for our listeners, anyone that in the first part of the book, there's a paragraph or so touching on those interviews that you wanted to get into the book. That's sort of condensed, touching on a few minutes with them, Steve Van Zandt and others, and that for whatever reason, those didn't quite work out, but it still turned out to be a successful opportunity to have those people on the air.
Well, one of the interviews that I wish we could have squeezed into the book, again, there was space considerations, was Terry Crews. You've seen him on the talent show. I think he did America's Got Talent, Brooklyn 911, really good actor. But he talked about how he was sexually abused in Hollywood. And he sat there and he was weeping on stage. I mean, he just really poured his heart out. And it was moving. I got choked up. The audience was like stunned. And you don't want somebody to hurt that badly, but that's what you want in an interview show, where somebody really tells you what he's thinking and feeling. And he was amazing. And if there's ever a Center Stage 2 book, that this one, God willing, does well, Terry Crews, that interview will be in that one, because not only because it was so revealing, but I think it could help people as well.
Well, hopefully there will be a Center Stage 2, and we'll be able to help you to get there. Michael, if you had an opportunity, a dream interview, someone either that's passed on or that's still with us, who would that be?
I've always wanted Springsteen or Billy Joel. Never been able to get them. Always wanted Jerry Seinfeld. And, when we first started Center Stage, I think the connection to the Yankees helped us get the A-list guests that we have. I think with Jerry, maybe the connection with the Yankees might hurt us because he's such a Met fan. I'm not sure. Would love to get him. We've had Larry David, and they're best friends. And Larry really had a good time on the show. And since that interview, he and I have become fairly decent friends. And I really like him a lot. It's one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. And I always had a desire to interview ex-presidents. And we had an opportunity once with Bill Clinton where he was promoting a book that he wrote about golf. And so they said, we got Bill Clinton. And I was thrilled. I would have loved to have interviewed him. And then they said, but his publicist said he will only answer questions about golf. I said, well, I'm going to have to pass. And they said, what? I said, well, what would that mean? I mean, he's sitting there. He's had all these things that went by his desk in the Oval Office, and all these problems that he had to deal with. I'm not going to ask him about him. It'll look awful. It'll look ridiculous. So I turned down the one president that had a chance to interview because I didn't want to be restrained to say you could just interview him on golf.
What was your most memorable guest and why?
It's probably Mike Tyson, which is in the book. I get into it in the intro to the interview where he was late. There was marijuana involved, but when he finally sat down, it was about as raw and visceral as you could see a person get in public. At varying times, he wept. He got furious. He was laughing uncontrollably. At times I thought he was going to hit me. I mean, he was just, it was all out there. I mean, it was out there. And I found this out this week, and that's why it's not in the book. But when that show ran, Spike Lee was watching. And from that show came the idea of the Mike Tyson one-man show on Broadway. And Spike Lee saw that show and called up Mike Tyson and said, let's make a Broadway show. I want you to say everything that you said on that show with Michael Kay, and it'll just be you on the stage. And it became a hugely successful Broadway show, which he's also performed in Vegas. So I knew that interview was special just by the way he acted and the way the audience reacted, the ones that were in, in the seats in the studio. But then finding out a week or two ago that Spike Lee saw that, and that was the inspiration to a Broadway show. That's pretty cool.
That is cool. And I've seen both your center stage interview and the show. Compelling. Question with regards to favorite guests that you've had on the show.
Larry David is probably my favorite guest by far. I'm such a big fan of Seinfeld and a big fan of Curb. And so there was a new season of Curb coming out, and he's a huge Yankee fan, like a legitimate Yankee fan, not like a celebrity Yankee fan. He really knows what's going on, and that had him agree to do it. And I was somewhat intimidated because, he's obviously so bright, and I didn't know if we were going to get Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry, where he's going to be nasty and you ask him a question the wrong way. And I actually was heartened that he is Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry, but not as mean. And as he said in the show, he said, I can't be that guy completely because in society I'd get punched. He said, but I think like that guy and I act like that guy. I'm just not as rude as that guy. And as I mentioned earlier, from that interview, we've had a dialogue. We text each other. He actually texts me during games about things that happen. And like 2 years after the interview was over, I get a phone call out of the blue. He goes, I got to do a speech at a college in Boston. He said, I hate doing speeches. I said, oh, I'm thinking, how does this involve me? I said to him, why are you doing it? He goes, well, my daughter goes there. It's Emerson. He goes, and I promised, her that I would do it, talk to the student body. I said, oh, well, good luck. He goes, no. I want you to come with me. I said, what? He said, I want you to interview me like you did on center stage. This way I don't have to be up there alone. You know what works, what doesn't. You just lead me to that. He said, would you be willing to come up to Boston and do it? I said, yeah, sure. And I thought that was like the greatest compliment, that he wanted me to recreate center stage for him on the stage at Emerson, and it went great. So he's probably my favorite guest of all of them.
Great. I've heard you tell the story numerous times about you're a young broadcaster, first time in the Yankee booth. You're on with John Sterling, and you ask his advice on as a first-time play-by-play man. Could you share your recollection of that? I think it's hilarious.
Well, I wasn't even that. I asked him. That's what made it even more stark. It's like I'd say 30 seconds before the theme starts. The Yankee song, and it's the Yankees against the Red Sox, and it's opening day. It's 1992, and it's obviously me about to realize my 9-year-old dream. And so the engineer's counting down 30 seconds. And I'm getting really nervous. And he said, as you embark on your career, I've got 2 pieces of advice for you. And I go, oh, this is great. He's going to tell me you got to speak from the sternum, use your breath differently. He goes, one thing, never, ever ask me my age on the air. Second thing, I frequently talk to myself. Don't be alarmed. And they said, you're on. And that was the beginning of my broadcasting career.
That's great.
And I hold my ear like that because that's how John talks. And for all you people that are viewing this, if you actually hold your hand to your ear and you talk, it forces you not to shout. And that's how he saves his voice. So he kind of uses that as a cupping device, and he hears himself better. So if you ever met John Sterling outside the stadium, and he talks to you, he will definitely hold his ear.
Great. If someone was to do a center stage on Michael K, who would be your preference to conduct that?
I think I'd like Jody to do it, my wife. Now, she certainly knows me the best, and I feel comfortable talking to her about anything. So, we've actually thought about, I'd say about 8 years ago, we cut a commercial for Yes for center stage, and they had me interviewing me. They had me sitting in one seat and they spliced it, and then I was answering in the other seat. So I don't think I could do an hour of that. So if I couldn't do it, I would turn to my wife, who I would trust with anything.
Play-by-play calls. What's your favorite? I think I know the answer to that one. But what's your favorite? And if you had the opportunity to take part in one, which would it be?
Well, the Yankees give you so many opportunities because they have so many great moments. I know that sounds corny, but if you ask some broadcasters this, that there aren't that many great seminal moments that you get to do. But I've gotten to do so many since starting in the 30 years. So it's hard to pick. In contention would be Tino's Grand Slam in 1998, Mr. November call with Jeter, Jeter's last hit at Yankee Stadium. But the one I would pick would probably be history with an exclamation point, Jeter's 3,000th hit. That was received well. I didn't overdo it. And it seems like that's a call that people kind of remember, which is flattering. So that would probably be the one.
Great. Let's take a quick second and talk about Fordham. And I know you've been vocal on the air about the Fordham sports program. Can you share some thoughts about that?
Well, I think they have the right guy in place in the athletic director, Edward Cull. Some of the other athletic directors, I just don't think they got it. They didn't realize the uncovered jewel that Fordham is. I mean, I've always said, why can't Fordham be Villanova? Why can't Fordham be Georgetown? Why can't Fordham be Loyola of Chicago? Why can't it even be St. John's? I mean, it's in the middle of New York City, the greatest city in the world. And it is an unpolished diamond. They've let it go downhill. They have a new coach that they hired, the assistant coach from Villanova. I hope that works. But there has to be a commitment. Greg, that's the thing. I think they're half in, half out. They're almost half pregnant. They're in the Atlantic 10. If you're going to be in the Atlantic 10, you got to go big time. You got to spend the money. And if you don't want to be in the Atlantic 10 and compete against teams that actually do spend money, then drop to the Patriot League, where you can still make the NCAA tournament, and you don't have to put the same amount of money in. Again, I think Edward Cull gets it. He's a smart guy. He's their new AD. But I don't know if the rest of the administration gets it. And when you talk to the head people at Fordham, which I have, Fordham charges, I think it's this year, it's like $64,000 a year tuition. And they have a waiting list of like 5,000 kids. So what do they have to change? If things are going that well, what do you have to change? And, my point to them is you'll be looked at differently. And if Georgetown's not a better school than Fordham, but it's looked at because of all the exposure it's got, because of Patrick Ewing, Dikembe Mutombo, Alonzo Mourning. Villanova, not a better educational school than Fordham, but because of Jay Wright, and they've won championships, they're thought of differently. And that's my only sale point to them. And I hope that by hiring Edward Cull, he can push them a little bit further. But again, it's the people upstairs that are going to decide how much money trickles down.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll take a couple questions from the audience. One of the questions was, and I noticed your reaction on the air on the radio program. How do you handle some of the, let's just say, more offbeat questions that you get? I see sometimes you're ready to shake your head, but how do you handle those and try and move on from some of those questions that can slow down the rhythm of the show?
You know what? Sometimes ridiculous questions are entertaining, but sometimes they're so ridiculous that you get angry that why would somebody suggest that? But then sometimes I will go off, but other times I just realize that the people that are calling in and the people that are listening obviously are the lifeblood, and you certainly don't want to alienate them or insult them. But again, if it's a really bad question and it could set Don off on one of his rants or set me off, I think that's pretty good for the show, but nothing is pre-planned and we try to be honest. And sometimes the honesty shows how angry you are at something.
Absolutely. So question that I had with regards to Paul Simon. That was an unbelievable interview. And if you could share a little bit about the backstage with Bernie Williams, because that must have been remarkable to see. Too bad that wasn't on the air. But Paul Simon.
Yeah, it's one of the great regrets that we weren't rolling on the backstage. But the interview with Simon, you asked me the favorite one, and Larry David's definitely number one. Paul Simon might be number two. I mean, he's a legitimate fan of the Yankees. He's a fan of the show. That's why he agreed to come on. He watched it. And when he came out, and this is in the book, he brought a guitar and he just put it on a stand next to his chair. And I said, well, it's probably just a prop, maybe a crutch. But he would tell the story of his songs. And then he would play the things he's talking about. Like when I asked him, why didn't, Mickey Mantle was his favorite player. Why not Mickey Mantle for Mrs. Robinson? Why not Joe DiMaggio? Well, why did he use Joe DiMaggio? And Mickey asked him that too. And he picked up the guitar and he said, it's all about syllables. Where have you gone, Mickey? Doesn't work. Resonate. Joe DiMaggio. So Joe DiMaggio didn't like it because he thought he was making fun of him. And Mickey wondered why he didn't use his name. But I'm just sitting there as he's doing this, and I might be 3 feet from him, maybe even closer. And as he's talking, I'm trying to keep my attention to what he's saying because I keep daydreaming about how lucky I am to be sitting this close to, this is music royalty. If the world goes on another 3,000 years, people are going to know the songs of Paul Simon and the brilliance of him. That was amazing, just being that close to greatness. And then after the show, because the next show, we usually tape 2 in a day, was Bernie. And Bernie is a really accomplished guitarist. He's not just an athlete who can play guitar. He's great. And he and Paul Simon sat in the dressing room and they played songs for like an hour. And they told stories. And I just said, can we get a camera in here? And it never worked out. And Paul Simon, like 2 years ago, I was at a function. He was there. He said, you know what I would like to do? I said, what? He said, I'd like to do your show again, but with Bernie. And we could try to do some of the stories that we did in backstage. And we were going to do that. And then the pandemic hit. So we haven't done a show in about 2 years. Hopefully, if and when we return, that will be one of the first ones.
That's actually one of the next questions that we had from the audience was hopes that when the show will return, if you have any idea when that might be and possible guests.
We do not have an idea when it might be. Hopefully, with things opening up and you can have an audience, because an audience is a big part of it.
Sure.
We'll be getting closer, but I know that we were getting close on Jimmy Fallon and people like that. That's a guy I'd love to have on. Love to have on Howard Stern. Love to have on, as I mentioned, Springsteen and Billy Joel. But there are no pre-planned guests right now. But obviously we'll aim high. The one difference is when the show first started was 20 years ago, and it was a different world. What we're talking on now, Zoom has changed the world. Can you really get an A-list star to take 2 hours out of his day and go to a studio and do an interview? And I don't know if Center Stage would be the same if we did it on Zoom. I'm not quite sure. So that all has to be worked out.
Yeah, that personal interaction that you have, it's tough to replicate. I wish we were doing this at Bookends right now, but fingers crossed we'll get back there before too much longer.
Yeah.
That's a hope towards the latter part of the year. So we got to touch on the Yankees, at least for a second, on where things stand at the moment. Obviously, tempers are starting to boil over. Aaron Boone blew up at one of the reporters yesterday. Things seem to be imploding. Michael, is it time to hit the panic button overall, or do you think the team is going to start to turn it around?
I don't like what I see, and this is now over 120 some odd games. If you go back to the beginning of last year too, they've been wildly inconsistent. When they don't hit home runs, it's very difficult for them to win, because they don't create runs. They don't run the bases very well. They've been thrown out 31 times on the bases. The major league average for a team is 18. The closest to 31, there's a team with 18. So they have been historically bad running the bases. And we saw that on Sunday. You know, they're down 7-0. Rougned Odor is on second base, nobody out. Ball's hit in front of him to the shortstop, and he tries to go to third and gets thrown out. Those things do not make you feel good about the mindset of this team or the baseball IQ. But what I would say is what I say on the show. Can they make the playoffs? Yep, they can. And the reason why I say they can is that none of these players really have to perform out of their mind. Just perform to the back of their baseball card, and they'll be good enough. That's why everybody picked them to win the American League pennant. Most of them have underperformed. The one guy that has been great, I think, is Aaron Judge. And I think that Garrett Cole has done his job. But, you know, their everyday lineup, Clint Frazier hasn't hit. DJ LeMahieu is not close to what he was the last 2 years. Gleyber Torres' power is gone. Aaron Hicks is injured. Now I could go chapter and verse. Giancarlo Stanton, when he's healthy, is a force, but he's not healthy that often. Gary Sanchez has played better than he did last year. And, you know, sometimes with teams that aren't great, I really thought this Yankee team was going to be great. They had great pitching for the first 2 months of the season, and they couldn't score. So they didn't win as many games as they should have. And then you worried, well, when they started to hit, the pitching is going to return to the mean, and that's exactly what's happened. So in the last, before Sunday's game, they'd score 5 or more runs and 10 or more hits in 5 straight games, where they were just 2 and 3 in those games because the pitching wasn't good. So both sides have to get right at the same time. The pitching has to be good. The hitting has to be good, and they could win. But these next 3 games are going to be very telling, everybody. I mean, Toronto really can hit. And that field in Buffalo is tiny. So how the Yankees come out of Buffalo after 3 games with the Blue Jays is going to be very telling.
Ian O'Connor made the comment on Saturday. I was on to promote the book, and he said it's very fitting that the Yankees are going to a minor league stadium the way they're playing. They're playing like minor leaguers right now. Do you?
Yeah, it bothers me. I know a lot of people that are here with us right now probably feel the same. Everybody wants Aaron Boone to get fired. I don't think this is a manager problem. I think this is a roster composition problem. A lot of scouts are saying that this is not a very athletic team. They just do one thing: they hit home runs. And if you stop them from hitting home runs, you have a good chance of beating them. So I don't know what they expect Aaron Boone to do. And does Aaron Boone have to teach a 28-year-old Rougned Odor not to go to third base when my 6-year-old son knows don't go to third base when the ball's hit in front of you? I think it's a player problem.
Michael, who was the biggest influence on your career?
Probably my parents. They really stressed education, reading, stuff like that, doing well in school. Nothing else was allowed. No extracurricular activities unless you did your schoolwork and you did well. It wasn't like, you know, you got an 80, that was cool. I was questioned when I got a 92 on tests. So they were, you know, they felt for a better life for their kids. You know, we grew up in the South Bronx and didn't have much money. That education was paramount, and to always work hard and to treat people respectfully. So to this day, I live by, you know, what they taught. And I'm trying to pass that along to my children as well. Read a lot, write a lot, and treat people the way you want them to treat you. I think those are pretty simple rules for life.
Besides what you've accomplished with Center Stage, the radio program, Yankee Play-by-Play, any other aspirations or things that you'd like to accomplish in your career at this point?
I've always wondered if I could do it nationally, you know, like do national games. I know my act plays in New York. I'm a New Yorker. Would it play in Dubuque? Would it play in Oshkosh, Wisconsin? Would it play in LA? I'm getting up there now in years, so I don't know if that opportunity is going to present itself, but I've always wondered what would I do nationally, but it's not a burning desire. It's just something I've always wondered about.
So one of our viewers, and I know I've had this curiosity answered before we went live, asked about some of the balls behind you, who those balls are signed by.
This one's Phil Rizzuto. This one's Ernie Harwell. Dick Enberg, Vince Scully, and then other balls that I've gotten around the years. That one's Bruce Springsteen up there. I never really like to bother people for autographs, so it really has to fall into my lap. I just don't like to infringe upon their time. But those are some of the baseballs that I collected, and it's funny. I just had them in a drawer, and then when we moved into this house, Jody bought me this, and it's kind of a nice display case. So those are some. Yeah, it looks nice.
So we're getting close to the end of our time, but a question I wanted to ask you, and what we've covered on some of the previous interviews, we lost a number of Hall of Famers and great players last year, and we lost Jim Mudcat Grant over the weekend. You had the opportunity to broadcast the final game at the old Yankee Stadium along with John Miller and the late Joe Morgan. Could you share a little bit about that experience and about the great Joe Morgan?
Well, first of all, getting a chance to do an inning on that national game was probably the most generous thing that any broadcaster had ever done for another broadcaster. Yes, didn't do the game. It was taken as a historical national game, so they could take it away from a local regional, which is what they did. And I was just resigned to the fact, well, I'm not going to broadcast the last game at Yankee Stadium. And about a week before the game, I got a call out of the blue from John Miller, who said, you know what, you're the voice of the Yankees, and you should do the last game, or at least part of it. I'd like you to come in and do the 7th inning on ESPN. Blown away. I mean, generosity like you just don't see in our business, which is full of vipers and people that are looking to take you down. But John Miller's star had been established, and he didn't have to worry about that. And so I gladly accepted his offer. And doing the 7th inning, I ended up calling the last hit ever at the last Yankee Stadium. Jason Giambi had a slow rolling single up the third baseline. So I have that. And then as for Joe Morgan, it's funny you ask about him, because he paid me the greatest compliment that I ever got as a broadcaster. I was doing the radio for about 8 years, and Morgan was in town to do Sunday Night Baseball, so it was a Saturday. And he walked up to me and introduced himself. And I said, no, I know who you are. And he said, did you ever play baseball? And I said, well, just as a kid. He said, what, like high school, high level? I said, no, never. I wasn't good enough. He goes, that's amazing. And I said, why? He goes, you know more baseball than anybody I have ever heard that didn't play the game. He goes, I felt that you had probably played at a very high level, just the way you analyzed the game, and couldn't get a better compliment. I mean, this is a guy who really knew the game, and I had a smile ear to ear the rest of the day. So he gave me that gift that I'll take with me for a long time.
Great memory. Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed the opportunity for us to reminisce.
Thanks, Greg.
Also share some of the stories about Center Stage. We're going to wrap things up at this point. I'm going to turn it back over now to Pat and Walter. But again, we look forward to doing this again with Center Stage 2, and let's get this book on the bestseller list.
That'd be nice. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
We like that. Thank you, Greg and Michael. Fantastic interview. What I like about this book, it's a great book to pick up, to read a couple chapters, put it down. Great Father's Day gift. We have several copies still available at the store. So if you'd like an extra copy, please give us a call tomorrow. Hopefully we can get it out in time for Father's Day. But on behalf of your friends at Bookends and fans out there, Michael, thanks for a great job, great book. Congratulations. And look forward to perhaps a sequel. So thanks a lot for everything. And everyone out there, have a great evening. And thanks for participating. Take care.
And I wanted to thank everybody out there as well. I know money is hard to come by. People are having difficult times. And for you to buy the book, that means the world to me. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you feel at the end of it that it's money well spent. So thank you so much for joining this virtual Q&A as well. Had a great time. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for everything.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
You got it.